Hello everybody. Today I'm going to do a little impromptu video. I was originally planning on having a scripted video out by now. I wanted to have it out a couple of days ago. It was going to be one that I've been working on off and on over the past few months, focusing on the impact that Christianity had on the development of Western civilization and refuting claims that it had little or no impact at all. I was nearly done with it. It was getting close to the 40-minute mark, but the Politicrat was stupid and decided that he would go and clear out some of his files to save space on his computer, and lo and behold, he ended up deleting the source files for the video clips that were being used for that particular video. So I'm putting that on hold, maybe wait a couple months, get back to that eventually, but long story short, that video is not going to be released anytime soon, and I don't know when that's going to happen. But either way, I have not uploaded in a while, and I figured I need to have something uploaded, because, again, I have not done that in a while. So I figured I would go ahead and do another one of these tests, because I've made a couple videos having to do with different political tests. The first one was the political compass, and the second one was the fascism test. But today what we're going to be doing is the one on Unpopular Academy. So if anybody is familiar with the Academic Agent, he is a YouTuber who focuses on making videos about politics, economics, history, just theory in general. He's a classical liberal type. And Unpopular Academy is his website and his community, more or less. And he ended up making something of his own political test, and that's what we are going to go ahead and take today. It's unique compared to a lot of the other ones that you'll see online, because it focuses on a lot of almost some metaphysical themes too, and I liked it personally. I'm just going to see where I come out. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that. Again, like in the previous videos where I've done tests, I'm going to go over each question. I'm going to say what my answer is, and then I'm going to explain the answer, meaning I'm going to say why I believe or don't believe so-and-so. But yeah, on that note, might as well get started. Because, again, this is a really interesting test, and I will be sure to place it in the link below. Sorry. Anyway, what was will be again. So it's starting with a metaphysical question, and it is a little vague, but I think it was worded that way on purpose, and it depends on... when I see this, I tend to apply it to how one may view history, for example. You often hear the phrase that history repeats itself, which is not true, because the exact same thing does not always happen. So, in the literal sense, what was will never be again. However, there are eternal recurrences that have existed all throughout history. You see trends, you see echoes of similar phenomenon that happen over the ages, the rise and fall of empires, business cycles, somebody who gets divorced 7 times, going through the same exact process, everything from custody battle to the court case. Anyway, yeah, what was will be again. So, not totally agree, because nothing will ever exactly exist as it had previously existed in the past. Yeah, you can make something similar, or a phenomenon that fulfills a common role, but you'll never be able to 100% bring back exactly that which was once present. But the ethos itself, yes, I do agree with. So I'm going to say somewhat agree, because my view of history is what one could call cyclical. However, I think that that is a bit of a reductive way of describing it. But yeah, somewhat agree. Social liberalism is a moral syphilis. That's a fun one. It depends on what is meant by social liberalism, because social liberalism can be many things. It can refer to like social program, like center-left, not quite social democracy, but Tim Pool liberalism. That's one example of what social liberalism would be. But then you also have the idea of socially liberal, like being fine with like gay people and like trans rights and like sort of individual freedom, that sort of thing. So I don't think social liberalism is in itself morally reprehensible by any means. I think it is generally a good principle, just at a basic level as a precedent. However, I do know, and I recognize that the existence of social liberalism within a society often serves as a way of, it functions as a means of giving one permission to take that to an extreme and to behave in a very libertine way. So I do not believe that social liberalism is, as Mr. Academic Agent says, a moral syphilis. No. However, I do think that everything has a catch-22. It definitely has the potential to, depending on the individual, enable them to take certain behaviors to an immoral extreme. So I am going to go with somewhat disagree. The West is broken and needs to return to its roots. I don't think that the West in particular you know what? I'll actually come right out and say I don't think the West can be saved, at least not this current iteration of it. However, I do think that it is possible to lay the groundworks of a successor to Western society, very similar to how our society came about as a successor to that of the Greco-Roman world. However, the West wasn't restored during the decline of the Roman Empire by returning to the morals and values and lifestyle that was very specific to the Greek Dark Ages and the Archaic period, which is when Greek civilization began. No, it ended up establishing a new dichotomy. It ended up reinterpreting a lot of those ancient Western motifs and putting a new spin on it. So you got breathing new life into it. So, in a sense, yeah, needs to return to its roots. However, the roots are more metaphysical and thematic and archetypical as opposed to literal, tangible pieces of culture, if that makes any sense. So, again, like I agree with the metaphysics of this statement. So, somewhat agree. In order to embrace the future, we must let the past go. Now, I wish there were a neutral answer or neutral option here, because I think that it really just all depends. Oh, you heard that. That was a phone that fell, and I am not going to bother picking it up. But either way, so yes, in order to embrace the future, we must let the past go. So I would somewhat disagree with this, because I don't think we should entirely let the past go. Well, that would be the totally agree. The thing is, the past is not inherently bad. It's not inherently good either. You have people and just cultures in general, like as it relates to their overall zeitgeist, that are inherently obsessed with either the past or the future. Our society happens to be obsessed with the future and the concept of quote-unquote progress. but similarly, the ancient Greeks were obsessed with their past and kind of feared what the future could bring. But so I think that there's a little bit of both. You need to remember the past, but you also need to stand firm. You need to stand up and get ready to face whatever the hell the future is going to throw at you. So, um, so I'm going to say I disagree. We shouldn't let the past go. We should, but we should understand that history never ends, and we will never be able to go back to exactly the same state or any previous state that has existed. However, again, like what I said in the previous question, you can always reinterpret that sort of primordial state of being, if that makes sense, to serve as the basis of like a rejuvenated culture. So I'm going to go somewhat disagree. History is a struggle over ownership of the means of production. I'm not even going to answer that. Totally disagree. That is just another skin-deep, materialistic view of history. Obviously, we know whose idea this is. But so yeah, totally disagree. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Yeah, nice thought. Someday join the world will be. I mean, it's a nice thought on the surface, but I'm going to say somewhat disagree because honestly, it just sounds boring. Well, not even going to add anything else. It just sounds boring. I think that the diversity between all these different cultures and worldviews just makes life a little more fun. Ideas can change the world. I mean, I think that's a given. I think that's pretty much empirically proven. I mean, look at how many people communism ended up killing. Look at the Holocaust. That was caused because of certain ideas. But there are many high-level important ideas, as our friend Dave Rubin would say, that have changed the world, but there are still many that haven't. But this is just a general statement, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think ideas have definitely had profound impacts upon the development of humanity as it relates to its general trajectory and affecting how history ultimately expresses itself in the unfolding of civilizational life cycle. So, totally agree. The difference between people are only cosmetic. Beneath that, everyone is equal. So it depends on what is meant by equal. Because we are not all equal in ability. We are not all equal with regards to like our genetic makeup. And when I say equal, I mean the same. We are all very, very unique in our own way. We're all individuals, of course. So in that sense, no. On the surface level, no. We are most certainly not equal, and I think that is fundamentally evident. However, I would argue from a moral perspective and from a spiritual perspective, yeah, we are all equals, quote unquote, as human. So by that metric, I would say yes, but that when I agree with this here, I do not refer to egalitarianism. I refer specifically to, in the eyes of like from a religious perspective, in the eyes of God, or if you just want to take a secular natural rights perspective, just in the eyes of us, of each other, I suppose. But yeah, so by that metric, yeah, I would agree with this. Give me a child until he is 7, and I will show you the foundations of the man. Hmm. I don't know. I'm trying to remember who said this. Uh, okay, I guess I'm kind of dumb here. It's kind of a blanking on me. Who said this again? But when in doubt, somewhat disagree. A lack of personal hygiene reflects badly on a person's character. So yeah, I somewhat agree with this because well, with regards to personal hygiene, um, if it has to do with whether or not they have control over particular circumstances. Like if they're willfully not bathing or brushing their teeth or changing their clothes or whatever, and they're doing it on purpose when they have the capacity to, then yeah, that definitely reflects badly on that person's character. However, like if they're out in the woods backpacking or something and they haven't showered in 5 days, of course the situation is preventing them from being clean, at least in the physical sense. But yeah, I think it reflects poorly on a person's character if they do not take good care of themselves. Some people are better than others. Um, some people are better than others at certain things, yeah, but I wouldn't say that there is any kind of objective way of measuring the betterness of individuals in a society. So I will, yeah, I'll disagree with this. All phenomena are correlated in one absolute and necessary law from which they can all be deduced. So I guess academic agent's going a little perennialist on us here, if I'm not misinterpreting it. But yeah, kind of like the idea that you can discern what universal truth is by examining certain beliefs and traditions that are common between different cultures, different religions, different codes of law in general. And I think that is a good rational method of trying to discern that. But I'd say yeah. I'd say I would agree. However, those ideas do express themselves differently, mind you, in those different cultures. Like, for instance, it is universally been deemed that, I mean, I think we all agree on this across all cultures, that murder is wrong. However, different cultures will have different criteria for what constitutes as murder and what doesn't. So, I will totally agree with this, though, because the premise is 100% correct. If only we had equality of opportunity, we'd see a much fairer distribution of material possessions. So, not necessarily. So, I am actually for equality of opportunity. However, I am not particularly deterministic in my view of history. The only way in which I would be classified a historical determinist is in that we know what will happen in the future, but we don't know how it will happen, or the events through which that sort of universal cyclical historical phenomenon will be expressed, more or less. So yeah, again, like I was saying, I don't think that there is any sort of determined factor, so by default, somewhat disagree. The market always provides a wider range of goods and services at a more affordable price points than those provided by central government planning. So this can be boiled down to just pure empiricism. This isn't even something that you can agree or disagree with. This is 100% true. So science will keep getting better until it eventually solves all of our problems. No, not at all. The idea that science will save mankind is a very short-sighted, materialistic, and almost shallow way of viewing the world. Like, science is not the ends. Science is more so the means to the end. It's kind of like the idea that religion and mythology, that sort of thing, that is the why, whereas science is the how, and that goes back to even concepts that St. Thomas Aquinas talked about, where he talked about how humanity was given the gift of rationalism and reason in order to for him to be able to better make sense of the world around him, of creation. So, in that sense, science is a tool. Science is not a science is not supposed to be like the core value of a society that again that is a source of salvation. That makes absolutely no sense, both from an irreligious perspective. It makes no sense, and then of course from theological perspective, for pretty much every religion that has a concept of salvation within its dogma, that also doesn't make any sense. So, and people who think that, people who make people who make science and empirical data, people who make that their mythology and their ideology are scientismists, basically. It's scientism, and we need to differentiate scientism from science itself, the belief system versus the tool. So, totally disagree. However, science is good. I think we can all agree on that. This statement is not trying to attack science, of course. However, that should be evident. Things are much worse now than they were in the past. Yes and no. It depends. I'll somewhat agree. Not much. I don't know. I'll somewhat agree. I'll be a doomer here. Whatever. That whatever occurred and whatever occurs, we don't have to apologize. We step over what exists. Oh, I totally agree with that. I think it makes sense. To best understand the events of a period, we need to uncover what people believed about themselves and about the world. 100%. This is actually my biggest problem with, and this has always been one of my biggest problems with people who are like Christian fundamentalists, quote unquote, who examine I think it could be worded like this, who treat the biblical scripture as almost an idol of sorts, make that the basis of their belief, and yet also go even further and interpret it word for word in the modern context, when biblical scripture was not written for a modern audience, or rather to a modern audience, because the Bible was not written to a particular generation of people. It was written for people. So you have to, in order to understand, and you can apply this to anything, in order to understand the meaning of a particular phrase or particular message, you need to go back and you need to understand what that particular phrase or idea represented or meant in the time and the place in which it was written, or in which said idea was formulated. So yeah, I think this is totally agree right here. Again, it's stupid to go back and read the Epic of Gilgamesh and to think that literally every single thing that is said in the poem, word for word, lines up exactly to how we would conceive it, or how we would conceive those concepts. So I might do a video focusing on that. I might tie it into a perennialist philosophy. I have a lot of video ideas going around right now, and so little time, and I'm also pretty lazy. So, but yes, totally agree. Inequality was born with the establishment of property rights. Shut the fuck up, Rousseau. A woman should feel shame for sleeping around. So I'd say, I mean, sleeping around, that phrasing, yes, 100%. If you're going around and having like sex with a bunch of like people randomly, like at whim, like not in a committed relationship or anything, I mean, I don't think there's anything about that to take pride in, and it works both ways too, men and women. So yeah, I mean, I agree with this. So pride goes before the fall. Totally agree. I think that history has demonstrated that this is the case. High culture stirs the soul, whereas low culture rots it. Okay, so I definitely agree with the first part. High culture does indeed stir the soul. However, I don't think low culture necessarily rots it. It just doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same potency as high culture. Low culture can rot it, but low culture does not inherently rot the soul. However, I think we have seen, though, over time, as culture has gotten lower and lower and lower, we see the rise of mass culture, pop culture, all that. We see it's basically in the media these days, or in movies and video games and stuff. It's always just remakes, rehashes, remasters, all that stuff. So I think it's more so just a lack of creativity in general. But so I'm going to somewhat disagree with this, because low culture is not necessarily low culture can be fun. Yeah. Food is the first thing. Morals follow on. That's a really interesting way of wording it. I think this one's actually going over my head a little. Don't necessarily know what he's trying. I think I get it. I think I get the basic idea. So like, I think from what I garner, what he's saying is that practical necessity comes first, and then after that we develop our morals, or at least our understanding. So I'd say in a sense, yes. So while I think that a lot of human ideas and human understanding of the universe does come from an inherently quote-unquote spiritual place, or maybe I should say metaphysical instead. However, at the same time, how we practice our ethics and that sort of thing also derives from our how we experience the environment and our struggles in the environment itself. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario, but then it's also just a very it's very complicated in pinpointing when moral arose, or when necessity arose, or when we gained this sort of cosmic awareness or understanding. So I don't think it's cut and dry either way. But I'll just, like, on principle, I'll somewhat disagree. So the first and foremost work of a man is to work on his inner essence, work on his being, work on himself, work on his soul and on his body. 100%. I honestly don't know, or or at least I can't wrap my head around why somebody would do anything other than totally agree. It's just about living a fulfilling life, creating meaning in your life, making it a self-fulfilling masterpiece, and it's just that is sort of one of the moral foundations, or as an idea, it is one of the foundations of our society, how to live a good life, how to, again, live a fulfilling life. You need to work on yourself before you work to fix the... Oh, okay, now I'm starting to sound like Jordan Peterson. That was not my intention when I started to say that. But yeah, you know what I mean. Work on yourself before you go out and try to help the world, bucko. But yeah, no, that statement is correct. Quality assurance regulations lead to better products over voluntary industry standards in the free market. Oh, Yeah, no, totally disagree. Of course not. Again, that's kind of an empirical observation you can make just when looking at economics. But you can tell how much money a person will earn just by looking at their genes. Not at all. There's a lot of factors that play into it, and while there may be like some sort of genetic link to something like that to success, possibly, it is, if that is the case, it is 100% not the prime driver of such. So disagree. There is no fundamental difference between men and women beyond how they are raised. So, for that to be the case, both men and women would have to have penises, and both men and women would have to be able to grow beards, and they'd have to both have the same kind of testosterone, and and if that were the case, there actually would be no women. Therefore, totally disagree. It's culture that makes us who we are. Somewhat agree. However, also, so we make the culture, but then the culture also makes us. So it's kind of not a paradox, but or a chicken and the egg type thing. But it is a sort of symbiosis. History can best be described as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In some ways, yes. However, I would say that the only metric by which that is the case is technology. Technology is really the only thing that progresses. But when looking at history as a macrocosm, I would have to disagree with that. Man is born free, but everywhere in chains. Is he born free? I mean, I actually would somewhat agree with this. I mean, I know Rousseau more or less said something similar. However, regardless, my interpretation of this, it would not be the same as his. I mean, because yeah, we are born as, I guess, free in the sense of, I don't know. You know what? Actually, maybe not. You know what? I am going to take that back. I'm going to say maybe not. I mean, everywhere he pretty much is in chains, but not all men are born free. I mean, man may have been born free, like thousands and thousands of years ago when he first came into proper consciousness. But regardless, I think I'm going on too much about this one. But yeah, somewhat disagree. To get to the heart of any matter, follow the money. So yes and no. So if you're looking at this from a materialistic perspective and you are basically trying to get rich quick, that sort of thing, you follow the money, get success, or whatever, material possessions, wealth, that sort of thing. So if that's the case, then I would totally disagree. If it has to do with personal motivation, and if that is basically your ideology. But if you're looking at this from an analytical perspective, and you read this from a place of trying to grasp the motivations that certain people have, and it's not even about money, of course. Like, I think that was kind of a skin deep interpretation of it on my part, anyway, in the first place. But yeah, following the money. You need to get to the bottom of something. You need to follow the clues. You need to. Yeah, I don't know if I can explain this in any better way, but yeah, no. In order to you can take a look at it from the perspective of power. Power begets power. You see certain trends in just make connections. You know what? I'm kind of rambling on this one, but I would agree with this. You gotta follow the hints. Don't be too conspiratorial though, because sometimes you'll create a narrative that does not exist. But what has risen will fall, and what has fallen will rise again. Some would agree. Self-control is more important than letting it all hang out. Totally agree. Anybody who says anything less than somewhat agree has their priorities all wrong and need therapy. So, it is natural that others will judge you. Yes, of course. I mean, I don't see how judging somebody is unnatural. I think we are humans. We all make judgments. We all use our intuition, our consciousness, even like our memories of previous experiences in order to vet certain people, and other people do that to try to determine the kind of people that we are as well as individuals. So it goes both ways. But judgment's completely natural. It's just part of the human thought process and decision making. So I totally agree. If a person is fat, it is because they eat too much. Most of the time, yes. Most of the time that is the case. However, of course, you do have people who have like problems with their metabolism, that sort of thing. Like I knew a kid way back in high school who had that sort of who had like a condition like that. He actually ended up losing all that weight though, which is good. So that goes to show that something can always be done about it. But yeah, no. So inherently, 100% of the time, not necessarily. So I'm going to go somewhat disagree there. And no, this is not because I do not believe in like any kind of fat acceptance or whatever. I'm just stating that based upon this, it is more nuanced than this. However, most of the time, yes, people are fat because they eat too much. And on that note, I could probably stand to lose a little weight too. So, somewhat disagree. The government should protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Totally disagree. It's another economics one. Now, we must strive to maximize the most desirable genes and to minimize the least desirable. Now, that's just social engineering at that point. Plus, I don't think that that should be like a prime priority in society. I mean, if you have like parents or something want to create like an Ubermensch or something, and they like do some kind of arranged marriage based upon DNA testing and compatibility or whatever, sure, go knock yourself out, go right ahead. But as a society, I don't think that that should be our first control. Again, that's kind of taking it in a very materialistic direction as well. So I disagree. This comment triggers me. Tradition is nothing but unthinking dogma. Without some semblance of tradition, there is no society. There is no understanding of what matters in life, in society, because you've completely discarded and deconstructed absolutely every single foundational principle upon which the society in which you live, the very society that made it possible for you to deconstruct the foundations upon which that society was built, were formed. Yeah, trying to get rid of that means that they're basically, you tear down your entire society. I mean, classic Burkean logic there. I mean, of course, it extends beyond Burke, but he's the most prominent who talked about the need for tradition, that sort of thing. And yeah, there are some quote-unquote traditions that might be that are stupid and even for the lack of a better word, outdated. But to completely vilify tradition because it is tradition, because it is old, and old things bad, new things good, I want good things, I don't want bad things, and new things are always inherently good things. Like, if you look at it, like, if you look at it like that, that is a very dangerous way of looking at the world. So, I totally disagree with this. This is a very, like, I don't know, I kind of want to say, this is very, again, it's like a scientism-esque statement. Race is culture, and culture is race. I mean, in China, yeah. I mean, but you have different cultures where identity is predicated upon different units, so to speak. Whereas, like East Asia, for example, the prime unit of identity is the family unit, and in order to be Chinese culturally, it is inherently tied to the race. So you have to be Han. You have to be ethnically Han, or else you are not Chinese. And if you are not ethnically Han, you could also never become Chinese. Whereas you have like cultural identity in the Middle East is based upon religion, specifically like Islam. Yeah, even though most of them happen to be like Semitic speaking people in terms of like the ethno-linguistic, with the exception of Persia. Race itself, yeah, I mean, you have like different ethnic groups that are all fighting it out in there, but they are all what we would think of as the same racial group in the end, because race and ethnicity are not necessarily synonymous. But then, of course, and then in the West, race doesn't even really have a front seat role, or a front row seat when it comes to determining cultural identity in the larger context of Western civilization itself. Like, you've got people of like different ethnic backgrounds who have contributed to the development of Western culture in its own way. However, that the same cannot be said again in a place like China, or to a lesser extent in India as well, both of which are statistically the most racist countries in the world. Well, what's funny is, so China is so racist that there's not even a concept of racism. But I'm getting off topic. So yes, while race and culture can be fundamentally linked to each other, depending upon the culture, of course, this is not a universal truth. So, somewhat disagree. Power and glory make people greater, whereas toleration make people weaker. Depends on how you define greater and how you define weaker. I think it can go either or. Sometimes toleration can make people weaker, sometimes it can make them greater. Sometimes power and glory can make people greater. I mean, we've seen that many times throughout history. But also, many times, power and glory, when people or somebody might seek power and glory in that pursuit of such, will make that person the architect of their very own destruction, and they'll just fall from grace again. I think that was we had a very similar comment or statements earlier. I think it was one of the first ones too. So I'll somewhat disagree, because I know it goes both ways. So history only moves in one direction, forwards. This is like such a middle school history lesson take, and it makes me want to gouge my eyes out. Most cultural change can be seen as the consequence of technological change. No, not at all. I mean, yeah, technological change can affect it to a degree, but it's not like a prime driving factor. Actually, I would argue that cultural change is what creates technological change, and that the technological change that occurs is the result of like what the sort of zeitgeist of that particular era. So yeah, I would actually totally disagree with this. A culture is nothing without its mythologies, 100%. And there has never been a single human culture, low culture or high culture, that has existed that does not have a core mythology. Regardless of, this might be a hard pill for some of the hardcore, like, anti-theist, mythicist type people who like to pretend that religion had no impact on the progression of human civilization. But we need to remember that there has never been a civilization that was not rooted in some sort of deep-seated religious foundation, in some deeper tradition. And, of course, mythology, the word mythology, the word myth, is very, very often and offensively misused and used as synonymous with a word like fiction. Whereas, no, mythology, all mythology is religious stories inherent to a particular culture or multiple cultures or whatever. And because all cultures are rooted in that their own primordial religious tradition, therefore they have their mythologies. And those mythologies, the motifs within those mythologies, reappear in a culture throughout multiple times in its life. Like the concept of the optimism of Christianity that lies at the heart of what we today call the West. The optimism, the idea of moving forward to a perfect heaven and a perfect earth, and like, oh, Jesus coming back one day, yada yada yada, all that stuff. That we see, and of course, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek there, but and kind of dumbing it down anyway, but you probably get the point. Either way, that's that Christian optimism, that feeling of progress that began really in the Middle Ages, which was fundamentally religious, mind you, would eventually reappear again during the Enlightenment, when it was secularized, naturalized, rationalized, and materialized, becoming the modern notion of progress that we see. And then that also, that same motif expresses itself in our ways of making sense of the natural world. Evolution, for example, is also built on that same premise, the idea of moving in this one direction towards a state of perfection. That is the core mythology of the West. That is how we try to make sense of things. And without that, we would not have many of the works of art and literature and poetry, and that's technically literature. But yeah, art, literature, music, that all express those same themes, those same cultural motifs. Without those initial mythologies, that would not exist. We would have no culture at all. So that would be yes, I totally agree. Human progress is an illusion. Technological progress, no. Human progress, yes. Greedy businessmen should be made to pay a higher rate of tax. I mean, as it relates to like a negative... I like the idea of a negative income tax, and my views on taxation are like a low progressive tax. Don't necessarily like it, but I feel like it's kind of best thing we have, that or just abolish all income tax and instate a national sales tax. I'm just going to say somewhat agree, because I technically do think that that should be the case, but very, very small level. Like, for instance, the richest of the rich have to just pay 15%, whereas, like, and then it goes down from there. So, a very small progressive tax. Monopolistic firms should be broken up by antitrust laws. Somewhat disagree. Most monopolies, almost all monopolies, are actually state-created. Yeah, this is a myth, or... Oh, I caught myself. This is a fiction that does not die. Everyone has the right to be provided the basic provisions of life, such as food and shelter. The right? No, I mean, they have a right to life, yeah, but they don't have a right to food necessarily. I mean, food provides sustenance so that you could sustain life, but food in and of itself is not a right. And I think one of the biggest problems with our society today is how we just throw around the word right so cavalierly. It's absolutely ridiculous. We think that all these things are right. Like, oh yeah, anything, the government can just say something is a right and therefore it is a right. Whereas rights are inherently natural. They are not things that can be given or taken away. Whereas somebody can technically come in and take away your food, or burn down your shelter or whatever. Um, these are tangible material things, whereas rights are more abstract metaphysical concepts. So yeah, no, I totally disagree. Plus, also, um, this statement implicitly leans towards, I don't know, it just, I sort of, it gives me it gives me like welfare vibes, personally. Like the government's responsibility is to be daddy, more or less. But yeah, no, I'm gonna say somewhat disagree, because I feel like, yeah, somewhat disagree. It is wrong to be envious of what others possess. I wouldn't say it's wrong, as long as you don't steal it. Like, just don't steal the stuff you're envious of. That's the wrong thing. I don't think it's completely natural. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. It's like, oh crap, I want my friend's new PlayStation 5 or whatever. It's like, okay, cool. Don't steal it, and you're fine. You could want it all you want. Save them and go buy one yourself, then you won't want it anymore. So yeah, totally agree. Okay. So here are my results. So for economics, I am significantly more free market versus forced allocation or central planning. That I was expecting that, more or less. Now, in terms of social, whether I think society should be organized upon strictly egalitarian or hierarchical, I'm more or less mixed. I think that society should be organized in a little bit of both. I think hierarchy is fundamental to a society. However, making the hierarchy as fair as possible, I suppose, is good. I mean, it's at least more ideal. I guess you can make a utilitarian argument for that as well, as long as it's not overly engineered and it doesn't impound upon the rights of other people, of course. But yeah, within the bound, like certain egalitarian ideas within the bounds of a hierarchical system is fine. But hierarchy is inherently fundamental. I know that's redundant. But no, it is fundamental to the success and the existence of any society. It relates to biology. I mean, of course, I recognize that there are many hereditary factors, but I guess I'm also still somewhat tabula rasa, because I think nature and nurture are both equally important when it comes to somebody's development as an individual. I think that there are determining factors all over the place. I don't think you could boil it down to both, but causal, materialist, idealist. If I would have taken this a year ago, or 2 years ago, I feel like I would have definitely shown up as significantly more materialist. But I've most certainly become more of a romanticist lately, understanding the importance of certain narratives and myths and I don't want to say the word esoteric truths, because that'll make me sound like a spurg. But material mediums such as science and technology and wealth, that sort of thing, those are not the be-all, end-all. Those are really only more recent developments. Whereas, and they are not, it is impossible to understand the world by looking at it through a purely material lens, because the world is not inherently material. Then again, I mean, that that goes sort of into dualism too. Like if you place too much of an emphasis on materialism, you sort of get a counter dualism, where it's like material world good, ideal world bad. Kind of funny, but yeah, no, you need to be able to understand that science is not. And again, we talked about this in the question. It was like 5 questions ago. Science will not save mankind. Science will allow us to understand mankind, but yeah, well, yeah. I feel like I could have worded this a little bit better. Again, I'm really tired. But yeah, definitely more of a romanticist. So, yeah. Historical. I was expecting this. Cyclical. Linear history does not exist. I wouldn't even call history cyclical either. I know it's just being reductive in how it's described. But yeah, history is simultaneously being and becoming. History itself is being, but then time itself is becoming, and it's based upon the development of each individual civilization, which will die, and then upon that, it's like looking at history as time versus history as space. So if you see history as space, and then you see, let's say you have like different planets within outer space. Each of those represents a different culture. The planet will eventually like die out. It will eventually dry up. It will eventually complete its life. Yet space is still there, and there'll be another planet that shows up. I think that's probably that's so not necessarily cyclical, but for the lack of a better term, yeah, things happen in cycles. Like they go through common stages of sorts. The moral, Puritan, libertine. I definitely wouldn't call myself a Puritan. I don't like that adjective to describe myself. But I mean, I guess in my own personal life, I hold like certain traditional ideas as important. So I mean, I'm not gonna like go out and proselytize to others to like keep it down, degeneracy wise, even if I might scoff. But yeah, I'd say I'm pretty traditional in my personal life, so that's not a surprise. And again, cultural, traditional versus modernist. Used to be pretty modernist, but yeah, I'm definitely more traditional in my culture. I think tradition is very, very important. Again, like I said a little bit ago, some traditions are like dumb and really no need to have them. However, a good number of them, if not a majority portion of them, are worth keeping around in some form or another. Whether it is 100% as they have always been, or in a sort of reformed way to better fit the needs of the context of like, current society. Either way, you cannot discard traditions, or else you really don't even have a society at all. It's suicide. It's cultural suicide to completely deconstruct traditions, and that's we have seen that many times in history in the past. But yeah, so that was Academic Agent's his test for, I don't even know, it was kind of more of a catch-all, jack of all trades test, some politics, history, culture, all that stuff. But yeah, so that was it. I just want to say I am currently working on another video, or I've at least started to, with a script. The first episode in a series that I'm calling The History Makers, which focuses on different historians, many of them more obscure historians, and introducing their ideas, many of which are not widely well known. But yeah, so I'm about to get to work on that, so stay tuned, and thank you for watching.